Welcome to episode 5 of The Equity Partner. Today I'm joined by Mr. Roger Barnes. Mr. Barnes is a CPA. He has his MBA. He's also had over 35 years experience in accounting, management, finance, urban development, commercial development, and much more. He served as a CFO for several companies, business development consultant, and funding consultant for business operations, expansions, and vertical construction projects. I'm grateful to have you on today and look forward to the conversation. So thank you for joining, Mr. Barnes.
Good morning. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well. So I wanted to start off with just with your personal background and kind of get to know you a little bit better, and also let people know a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and kind of how you got to where you are today. So tell me a little bit about your personal background.
I am probably one of those people with a very unique, that's the phrase I'll use, background. I'm a big history buff, so I have to tie in my family history in this context. I'm third generation, fourth generation, I guess some would say, downstream from actually my family being owned by slaves, being slaves to the local community, where the land that my mother lives on now was actually sold to my father by the previous descendants of the people who owned my family in Southampton County, Virginia. So the uniqueness is that while I come from a rural country family farming environment, we actually have a lot of connection to our previous history. So I've always been passionate about the history. I, of course, went to Norfolk State University where I got my degree, but I came from a very large Christian foundation family where my father, who is now deceased, was a great leader in the church, and so we were raised that way to have a lot of value on hard work, getting along with your family members, and trying to strive for the best. So in terms of personal background, I did go to a local high school and went to Norfolk State where I majored in accounting and finance and economics, and I'm married with 3 children. They all are, at this point, of course, adults and have their own careers. I was fortunate enough to marry my college sweetheart from Norfolk State University, and we're still together.
All right.
As far as more personal data, I happen to be the assistant pastor at a local church here in Columbia, Maryland, where I live now, St. John Baptist Church here in Columbia. Okay. And I do a great amount of community work because I come from a large family where we relied upon each other. And I happen to believe that the community has to help people that they rely upon. It's not what I would call a normal environment. And the reason I said eclectic and very diverse is this. Coming from the background that I had, I came of age through the civil rights era, the protest movement, on the tail end of the era where segregation in the education system was still prevalent and only corrected when I was in junior high and high school. So those life experiences had a lot to do with what makes me the person I am today. And while I do believe that those personal values, while not always central to society now, because we're so different now, those are things we can never get away from. Yeah. I don't know if I'm answering your question in the broader personal sense, but that's a lot of what my background has been. And of course, I like to use the phrase, I'm just an educated country boy.
Well, no, you definitely answered. One question I had, I mean, what drew you to economics and finance? I mean, from your background growing up and going to Norfolk State, what drew you to that specific degree?
Actually, it was the reality of high and intense poverty as a young child growing up. And I always had an affinity for numbers, finance, algorithms, mathematics. And although I had initially had a desire to go into the military as an Air Force pilot, being derailed by poor eyesight, that caused me to say, well, my next alternative was to focus on where my love and passion was. And the fact that it was a very austere environment in which we grew up, very loving, but finance was something that many in my community did not have a lot of access to. And I will admit there was one phrase, one comment that was made to me in high school that by a guidance counselor to this day that bothered me so much that it made me decide to focus on accounting, economics, and finance. And that was when I was talking to one of my high school guidance counselors about focusing on a major in college. The guidance counselor said that accounting and finance and being a CPA were things that were beyond Black people.
Mm.
And when that comment was made to me, that became a big driver to prove her wrong.
Mm.
And while I won't malign her by saying her name now, that she's deceased and gone, but she was from a different era.
Yeah.
And that was the mentality that they had.
Yep. It's sometimes those moments that have life-changing or life-impacting results that drive us to succeed. And I think that's a even though that experience was probably hurtful, it was probably helpful at the same time. So
It was.
yeah,
And it caused me to take the approach of never give up, never stop trying, and never give in.
that's right. So tell me a little bit about just your professional experience. I mean, 35 years experience. So you went to school at Norfolk State, and then you went right into the career that you had studied for. So tell me a little bit about your professional experience.
Now, that is definitely interesting. When I became a member of the Big 8 public accounting firm to start my career, I was supposed to actually start in Detroit, Michigan, and instead transferred to Washington, D.C., being newly married to keep my new bride near her family and home.
Mm-hmm.
And the uniqueness, Jeff, is that out of an office of several hundred people, there was no one who was a male auditor, a male public accountant who looked like me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how my career started. I was in an environment where I was not welcome, had to prove myself over and over on even the most basic and rudimentary things, and ultimately overcame a lot of that to be promoted early as a Big 8 public accountant. For those who may not be familiar in this new generation, Big 8 public accounting was where we had 8 major accounting and independent auditing firms in those days. Now they're only the big 3 or 4 because there were so many consolidations. So professionally, I started with a major accounting firm out of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
When I left that firm, I actually went into commercial development and helped build Columbia, Maryland, working for the Rouse Company through its visionary leader, James Rouse, who I was fortunately able to know personally.
Okay.
I spent several years in public accounting, a number of years in the commercial development arena where I was taught urban development, community planning, retail, multi-use, vertical construction, the accessory businesses related, insurance, internal audit, finance. After a number of years at the Rouse Company, I then shifted over to international finance in the secondary mortgage market with both Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. There's one interesting tidbit that you may not be aware of. A number of years ago, if you'll recall, there was that major accounting scandal where the GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, were taken over by Congress. And one of those enterprises, Fannie Mae, was found to have manipulated their books to the point where they were accused of fraud and a number of other accounting irregularities. The SEC actually fined them almost $500 million, replaced a lot of their board of directors, and ultimately took over them. While I do not like the term whistleblower, I'm the person who exposed that. I was director of management reporting and cash control at the enterprise Fannie Mae, and it was because of the things that I saw in my internal efforts to make change, which were unsuccessful, which led to ultimately my exposing the accounting irregularities. And while many use the term whistleblower, I don't happen to care for the term, but it's what everyone uses. And that foundation, my testimony before the Securities and Exchange Commission, Justice Department, my testimony to the Office of Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight, I was found to actually be correct. And when it was all said and done, the SEC agreed with me, and that led to what I refer to as the government enterprises being taken over by Congress. When I left that arena, I ultimately began a lot of business development consulting, started my own consulting enterprise. And over the years, having built a network of funding sources and other resources, I became a center, as I believe, to help minority and women-owned businesses to grow and try to overcome some of their challenges. That's a good synopsis of what the last 25 to 35 years have been. And in that time period, I've done a lot of vertical construction among the other finance and other related activities.
Hmm. Did that experience, as far as being able to expose them, did that experience have any negative impacts on you, or did it mostly have some positive impacts on you in the accounting industry?
Everyone says that they want to have an honest person in the corporate arena on their team.
Hmm.
Jeff, what I have found is that in the big corporate arena, that is often not the case. To answer your question very honestly, what I found was that I was chastised, I was blackballed. With my excellent credentials, I never received not one opportunity for an interview post whistleblowing at Fannie Mae. As a result of the 350, I think that's the point at which I stopped counting the interview requests, that job applications, et cetera. Even as an executive experienced manager, I stopped counting at that point. So some of the negatives were these, both they were good and bad. The negatives were my house was shot at one point during the investigation. Dead animals were disemboweled and put in my front yard. I had a sports car that was vandalized. Chemicals were sprayed on my house to the point where the police department had to actually investigate to determine whether it was harmful or not. The pressure was such that my kids were afraid to identify me as their father when they went to college for their safety. I had a local pastor, for example, who had a complete set of the documents while the testimony was taking place, safely secured, so that in turn, if something happened to me, that they would be able to see the light of day. So those were some of the negatives. The only positives that I can say came from it was that it instilled in me the confidence that I did the right thing. Even though I sacrificed my career, I did do the right thing. I take great pride in the fact that the feedback I got was so overwhelmingly positive from regular people. I'll make one aside. There was even a letter I received from a young Caucasian child out in the Midwest thanking me for having the courage to stand up in the face of the challenges that I had. And so I did the right thing. I still try to recover from that even to this day. But that's part of what drives me to help others.
Yep.
And so when I make the comment that everyone says that they want someone with integrity, I've done a lot of national motivational speaking on corporate integrity and personal integrity. And what I found is that that's a phrase often used, but not often employed.
I can completely understand that being a stressful time, but
It was.
I think doing the right thing, at the end of the day, if you did the right thing and help somebody else, that's what's most important.
Yes.
So,
But I learned a lot along the way. Yeah.
I bet you did. I mean that experience sounds like just a extremely impactful experience. Just you recognizing something was wrong and being willing to stand up and be the face of telling the information, so that way somebody could make changes.
Yes, indeed.
I think that's a huge experience. It's unfortunate you had to deal with the negative effects of that experience, but I think there's a lot learned, and now you're able to do it independently.
True.
So, tell me a little bit about just your responsibilities as a CFO, kind of things that have worked well between being a CFO and working with a CEO. What are the positives and negatives of that role?
Well, the role that I have with some of the companies that I serve as a CFO in their enterprises, aside from the consulting that I do, is that it helps me point out, for example, the importance of strategic planning as a component. We all know the phrase, if you don't plan, then you plan to fail. And that is actually true. Working as a CFO with a financial background, we always have to have, in my opinion, the collaboration with the rest of management. Those who own their own companies still need some reliable resource that can give them honest, transparent answers on the good or bad, pros and cons about their decision making, to make the recommendation that you're not just presume that everything will always be positive and profitable, but to plan for those days, the points down the road at which the economy might change, your margins might thin. How do you handle making sure that you have the right people around you? So some of the CFO responsibilities is simply always being ready to critique your own operation, to find the weaknesses so that you can make suggestions for change and at least be able to understand that you're putting your own firm at risk, even if it's not intentional.
Mhm.
And I will add also that being part of the CFO role that I have played, both as a independent consultant serving the CFO role, and also as the former CFO as part of someone else's enterprise, is that you always have to be willing to understand and take information in what I call silos, and then to connect them. By that I mean there are banking related issues that have to be addressed, separate from the employment related issues, separate from staying abreast of regulatory changes, separate from the back office. But you have to be able to deal with all of that and then interrelate it to be able to explain it to the person who owns the business. And I've done a very good job of that because of the long trail of which I walked in my career so far.
Mhm.
And I do think that there always is a need, even if it's a small business. We sometimes leave some areas understaffed because we're small and face the challenges of growing.
Yeah.
But we still have to have what I call a CFO and a CEO mentality, in that you're trying to run something that has so many pieces. It's hard to keep track if you don't bring resources to the table to join you.
That's right. What would you recommend for either a startup or a small business? What are the key things, key consistent challenges that they have because either they don't have a CFO or they need some more accounting expertise? But what problems have you seen consistently that they run into?
The biggest problem, Jeff, I would say right up front, is that most people who take the time to become an entrepreneur, to run a business or to start a business, they have what I call type A personalities. They are very energetic in terms of what they want to do. They have a lot of passion. But the negative with that is that the biggest challenge is overcoming the I can do it all mentality by myself.
Mhm.
There's always great expertise in some area, but none of us are great and experts in all areas. And that old jack of all trades mentality can be the failure point for a lot of us as small business people, because we're doing so many hats. Even if we have the capacity to do individual areas well, some areas falter because we get stretched too thin. So to answer your question, the first thing I would say to the small business person who's looking to start or is young in the formation of a business is to open themselves to the mindset that I can't do it by myself. I can't do everything myself. And to begin to look for those people that you can have join you, whether they be peers, mentors, employees, to help you get better resources.
Yep.
And the weaknesses that come with trying to do it all yourself is that some area will fail. And that's the advice I start out with whenever someone asks me what the first piece of advice I would give to overcome challenges. And the second one would be, there's always a shortage of capital.
Hmm.
Generationally within our people, we have not always had inherited wealth. We have not had the legacy income and resources that some other parts of our culture have had. So the result is that we're often starting from scratch from the very beginning with limited capital, great ideas, great intellect, and being the challenge of having sufficient resources to properly start leads to so many firms, even if they have a good business model, failing in the early years. And
Yeah.
that's the second item I would say is a challenge, is trying to overcome the lack of capital.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the questions I have as well, just talking about access to capital. But before we get to that point, as a CPA, what are there any current tax laws impacting businesses and individuals that you feel like is important for people to know from a tax perspective?
Now, one thing that I've learned is that the tax code and the regs change so frequently, it is very difficult even for a CPA to stay abreast if they're doing other things and not just purely specializing in that arena. It's tough to stay abreast because the changes are so frequent.
Yeah.
So the suggestion that I would make to anyone, even as a small business person, is to find a competent, certified public accountant who stays abreast of the regulations, who stays read up on current changes in GAAP business practices, who will attend webinars and seminars to at least be able to give you good advice and suggestions on what they see in the marketplace. And so even myself, I'll use as a perfect example. With all the business knowledge that I have, it is not easy at all to stay abreast of the changes.
Yeah.
The accounting rules and regs may not change very frequently, but tax code changes annually. And trying to marry the two together to give the best advice is not easy. And it is almost impossible for a business owner running the business as an executive and also hands-on to stay abreast of that and be on top of it. So what I would suggest is that you have to find someone, and it doesn't have to be an expensive, large accounting firm, just someone who stays on top of the regulations, reads the tax code. And I'll use a perfect example right now. One of my big disappointments, even as we're going through the pandemic that we're suffering through right now, is that we have the CARES program that has been put billions of dollars available for small business. And I've been so disappointed to learn that many of our businesses, even with that capital being available, either because they were not prepared, didn't understand, or did not have someone to tell or explain to them how their payroll protection program called PPP works, have not been able to take advantage. Or they couldn't take advantage because they had not set a relationship with the banker who already had access to the portals through which the big companies were able to get large amounts of money, and those who truly need it are set back and suffered. So I know I've given you a wide range and answer there, and I'm not sure it's exactly what you were looking for.
Oh no, you're preaching to the choir, to somebody that is in finance and banking, and so I completely agree with you. Whether you have a relationship with someone at the bank, you have your records in order to be able to substantiate your request. I think you're right. There were some people that missed opportunities because they didn't have the information or they didn't have the relationships. And so what you said was spot on for somebody that's in the industry and seen, I've seen people get approved and seen people get declined. That's why it's important to have people in your corner, i.e. the trusted advisors in your corner to be able to guide you in the right direction.
I have a phrase I like to use. Don't go looking for the help when you need it. Look for the help before you need it.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you talked a little bit, you led me right into my next point with access to capital for small businesses. And you said that's a major point, which I agree. What different sort, tell me a little bit about some different sources of capital that you've helped some small businesses or businesses in general, maybe not necessarily small, but consider as they kind of look for capital opportunities to expand or grow their business.
Well, I embarked on my effort to overcome the challenge of getting capital many years ago. One of the things I started to do is I recognized that networks, Jeff, matter. And so I began to build networks coming from the finance arena where there are a lot of miscellaneous creative lenders that are not hard lenders. There are investors because of my familiarity with the equity markets. There are individuals who have funds that are willing to invest in businesses. I began to build a network where essentially there are brokers themselves who have networks of lenders, philanthropic lenders, specific purpose lenders that they work with. And over the years, I built several networks, which I have and I utilize to this day. I have relationships in some cases with hedge funds that do large scale and small micro retail lending. There are individuals that I have made contact with and have maintained those relationships with across the country. So when I get a request for someone, I'll use a perfect example. We have a wonderful young lady in one of our urban cities that runs a addicted drug treatment facility. Mm-hmm. And she had the challenge of trying to get capital to help expand her operation to serve the community. What I have been able to do is get her in front of several lenders, not the traditional banks that were not interested, but through creative financing with one of the lenders in my network that is in the verge of getting her funding right now. There's a small construction firm, to be very specific, in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, who had been unsuccessful in actually building their business. I was able to reach out to one of the funding sources that I have, get them a small loan to allow them to get started. They then were able to acquire a discounted development that had failed that someone else had and had lost through a local bank that I helped them get their package and submission together. They're now building homes in an area, quality homes that are affordable, being successful from a loan that they received when they were a startup just a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. It's not that every situation will succeed, but then there are those one or two that do, that give you the confidence and the encouragement to go forward. Getting back to the funding networks, I'll say, for example, is this. In the networks, I have some who actually, and we have one major HBCU right now that has a massive capital project on their campus down south. And one of the hedge funds that I work with has actually in process now of offering them a huge loan to build dormitories and student housing and a sports complex at that HBCU.
Yep.
There are other HBCUs that may not be aware, but there are capital there outside of their traditional state-supported and public funding, and there are creative ways to bring them that funding. And I just simply mention that simply because of the fact that I never know what someone may come to me and ask the question of what capital might be available. But I'll take that information, run it through the network, and ask who's within my funding network that might be able to help. Is it a small loan for a woman-owned business? Is it a manufacturing business, someone who just needs money for payroll? And typically, I'll find someone within that network that's interested, and I can give them assistance in putting that package together often as a consultant and with expertise, just simply sometimes pro bono to help them make it work.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a great point. Depending on exactly what you're looking for and
right,
what business type you're in, whether you're woman-owned, you're veteran-owned, whether you're located in a city that has some type of incentives for people to stay in that city, I think it's important to know what your resources are.
Right.
I've had the experience as well, because there's so many organizations that do micro lending for startups. But the caveat is that they need to stay with you and help you with business planning. And so that's one of the things I think people need to know more about, because they think they can't find capital for their business.
And you made a good point when you said that there are often those who want to, who do offer micro lending. One of the challenges that we still also have, regardless of how it came about, is that often our businesses and business people are intimidated by the need for compliance, the documentation preparation, the fact that someone will be looking at their books later to try to help them. That's one of the big challenges I believe that many of our businesses and entrepreneurs face, is that intimidation factor and the fear factor that if someone else is looking at my books, then in turn I'm going to lose some level of control. Yeah. Or they believe that it's so cumbersome that it's not going to be worth it. And as a result, they suffer because they're not prepared for the microfunding that is actually available. Mm-hmm. And I run into that all the time, where I try to encourage small business and leaders is to take the time to learn the back office in your business. Yeah. Take the time to understand why you need certain things before you actually go for financing. I know you may get to some of those questions later, but the point is that often when we go to a doctor, we know up front there's a set of diagnostics that are going to be asked to determine our physical health. It's very similar to getting financing and capital. In my opinion, there's a set of diagnostics that are going to be asked, questions about your business. How do you operate? Number of employees, what kind of planning? And we just have to get comfortable ourselves, I think, often in walking down that road.
Mm-hmm. You led me right into that next question about just how entrepreneurs should prepare to seek capital. Continuing with that point, what recommendations do you have for them to prepare outside of getting the right people involved in their corner? But what other key points would you say helps them be more prepared to seek capital?
The first thing I would say immediately is there are three things that the entrepreneur or the business person needs to get. One, it doesn't have to be a very, very expensive, but they have to have an accountant. Get someone who knows accounting. Have that person as a resource. Number two would be an attorney. Not that you have to have someone on an expensive retainer, but someone that can give you some kind of legal support, advice before you sign contracts, before you engage, be able to review agreements and documents that you might find that you need. And the third one, we mentioned previously, is the banker. I think you have to have that triumvirate in place. Accountant, an accountant, an attorney, and also your banker to make it work. The last one I would throw, if I had to say, was fourth, is someone that will provide you insurance. If you have those four in place and you seek their advice and counsel, in my opinion, it does help you to be prepared, because the accountant is going to let you know where your shortcoming in your paperwork, your documentation, taking care of your books where you don't have to be the expert. The lawyer, the legal counsel, often will let you know when you have a bad deal. Not every deal that you're offered, even when you're trying to strive to grow your business, is one that's worth pursuing. Mm-hmm. The insurance, because you have to have insurance, and I have so many examples of disasters that have happened because someone did not have adequate insurance or no insurance because they operate on the premise nothing bad is going to happen to them. And the last one, getting back to the banker, I make this observation. Oftentimes, even if you are trying to get capital and your bank is not successful, you have to show you have a relationship with the banker that has said no, for example, to go and pursue SBA financing. So a lot of times the SBA has funds that are available, but you have to show that you've been turned down by a local banker. And so you need that bank relationship so that you at least have the means of showing the SBA that you're serious about trying to grow a business. You've been turned down, but being turned down is a first step that the SBA often requires before they will lend, even though it might be low rate money,
That's right.
low interest rate funds. So in terms of getting back to answer your question very succinctly, having those four in place, and then taking the time to make sure that whoever you do have in your corner have the same aligned interest that you do. We often like to put friends with us, get friends and those that will always give us the encouragement and the positive answers. That is good. But if they have different motivations, it can destroy business later when you find that there are issues of difference on who's making the decisions, compensation, visibility if the business starts to get traction. And so friends can often be great for cheerleaders, but friends don't always end up being great for business partners. And the same applies for family members.
I completely agree with that statement. I see it all the time. I think, when selecting that person to be in your corner, you definitely want to make sure their interests are aligned. I mean, they're different, in the banking arena, just like it is in the legal arena or the accounting arena. You have levels to who can handle what. And so if you want to be seen or deemed as a priority, you want to, if you're a small company, you want to deal with the best person that handles businesses within your space to help you, because you want to be deemed as a priority to that person. And you also want that person to be an advocate for you.
Right. And I would also say that it's always good to be associated with other people who may be in business, so you're not always feeling that you're all on an island by yourself. And by that, I mean, if there's a local association of minority business, if you happen to be a minority, if there are local associations of women-owned businesses, or just business in general for small business, try to be engaged in some way with others so you can see how others in casual conversation in an informal setting have been able to overcome some of the problems that you face. Because there's no new problem under the sun. The problems are all repetitive. It's how we address them. How prepared are we? How strong are we to be able to overcome and then succeed? And by having others around that we have seen succeed, or at least can ask questions, what did you do? How did you overcome this problem? And realistic opportunities of seeing success with others can help.
That's right.
Because in my darkest hours, even as I have faced challenges, I have found the worst is thinking you're in it by yourself and you're all alone. And when you find that others have had similar problems and they succeeded, it at least helps you have a little bit of motivation to not give in and give up.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That might be the pastor side coming out there.
That's okay. That's okay. We all need encouragement. But I think that's spot on. What work have you done? Talk about your community empowerment work. I read a little bit about that on the website and also on your bio. It was just your community empowerment work. Talk about what you've done to continue to empower the community and how it's impacted you as well.
I'll be very specific. On the one hand, the economic development within the African American community is obviously an area that I'm very passionate about. So one of the things that I made a decision early on was to go out and become engaged in affecting the decision making within the community. I was appointed to the Equal Business Opportunity Commission here in my local county. And the acronym EBOC, which is what it stands for, is an actual non-paid county council appointed position to help recommend and approve minority, women, and other firms to do business with the local county government, the Office of Purchasing, to be able to help improve the level of participation in economic contracting and business for those companies that come to us. So I'm right now the longest serving commissioner on the EBOC here in Howard County in Maryland. And part of that passion is simply purely to help others. And we actually get applications, we review them, try to encourage those companies to be engaged with business in the county, get them approved so that they are certified to at least be on a resource list for improvement of their chances to get work. And that's just one area. Also, aside from the EBOC, one of the other things that I believe in is that you have to affect the legislative side. So one of the things I did years ago was I got involved politically. And as a result of being involved politically, we won't make this a political conversation, but I have to touch on the subject. So what I did was I made it a point to get engaged in the local politics of the community. For those politicians that I saw that seemed to be genuine, I began to support and work with several of them. As a result of that, I'm the treasurer for the first African-American county executive ever elected in Howard County. We successfully were able to get him elected just over a year and a half ago in a county that had never had a Black person as county executive. And having worked with him for years, and by being his campaign treasurer, these are the kinds of roles that we have to be activists and not passive to play. So I've done that, and that's been a great impact that he's had because he's visionary and very good for the community. In addition to that, one of the things that I have been successful in doing is let me back up for a moment. One of the things that often happens is that we have so many of us that are passionate about what we do in individual organizations. You may be a member of a different fraternity or a different sorority or a different church or a different community group. But what happens is that we always work crosswise to each other instead of being unified. So back in about 2013, I was one of the group of people who were the founding members of the African American Community Roundtable here in Howard County. And I'm still on the executive board for that group now. Again, this is non-paid. But here's what we did. We came to the conclusion that we're all stronger together with one common purpose than all operating individually. So all of the Divine Nine, the members of the fraternal community, the sororities, the churches, we have come together with about 30 of the largest Afrocentric organizations within the county to increase our power, our empowerment, our ability to affect the education system, the legislature in the county with the county council, and to be able to affect social impact with those who have health issues and all that. And so the African American Community Roundtable is one of my greatest areas of satisfaction. I'll take a brief aside, mention that I have served in the NAACP in various capacities at the state conference level. I happen to be a very strong, powerful, proud member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. And in that role, I have served in the community for almost 45 years continuously. Social work, community service work, working with young people, trying to be a role model for young children going to school, participating in reading day so they can see a Black male in the classroom reading to kids, food support, helping with the food pantry. What I mean by that, I'm just one of many who do these things, but I think that has to be a big part of what the personality that makes us whole. And that's what makes me happy is that I do those things because that old adage, to whom much is given, much is required, I do believe applies. And when I say much is given, I'm not talking finance. I'm not talking physical wealth. I'm talking about what's in the heart, what's inside, and what's here. If you have the expertise and you have the passion in the heart, find a way to help somebody. Yep. That's just my old-fashioned view.
I agree with that view, and I mean what you've done is your community empowerment work is just as powerful as your business work. Getting involved in the community, being a face, being visible, to others, and being able to help uplift them. I think that those are the qualities that help the next generation of future leaders, and it matches why I wanted to bring you on to the Equity Partner. So I appreciate you talking about your community empowerment work. One thing I want to discuss as well is just some of your work in commercial real estate and commercial development. I think a lot of people are at least well versed or have a slight understanding of residential real estate, but they don't understand the benefits and complexity of commercial real estate. So just share a little bit about just that experience, what you've done, and things that someone might not know that will probably be helpful.
Well, going back to my initial involvement in commercial development and real estate with the Rouse Company early in my career, what I have found is that commercial real estate is an area with a lot of opportunity. Mm-hmm. Not every project has to be a large one, but a lot of the models that we follow are similar. Ascertain, for example, is there a piece of land, is there a tract of land that's available? What are the best uses that it might be used for? Do you have a relationship, for example, building a relationship with the local zoning authority so you can find that if the intended use of something you might have in mind doesn't fit what that land might currently be zoned for? So, what is the process to get the zoning changed to fit what you think it would be a better and higher use? Mm-hmm. Then with real estate, in commercial real estate, understanding that typically the process is not quick, but it happens over a long cycle of time. Often we will find that there's an opportunity to have a successful development, but because of haste, there'll be missteps along the way, or that there will be impatience and cause a project to fail. And so I believe that one needs to look at the site, whether it's something that needs to be built, whether it's something that's already in place that needs to have its use changed to a different use to make it more profitable. Having the right people. Take the time to do a feasibility study. Don't assume that just because it's a good idea to you, the individual, the entrepreneur, that is actually going to work in the economic environment that project might be located in. Take the time to ask the questions. Who's the project going to serve? What market are you trying to target? Is that market close enough by geographically to make it work in the miss? But there are a couple of things in quick summary, as I was saying, was to make sure that you take the time to do the feasibility analysis to find out whether the project is viable. Mm-hmm. Is there a market for what it is that project might provide? If it's commercial real estate or commercial development, is there enough density and population around to serve whatever that project might be? What are the capital requirements to build the project? Does the community support? And let me back up to make an extra point of that. Often the community will be the first opposition to any project, even if it is a one that will ultimately support the community. So one has to build a relationship with the community. Explain what you're trying to do beforehand to try to get community buy-in in the event that there is a reading to the community, a county council support, or some other type of community input that's required, which is often the case. And then lastly, I would say that one has to be willing to collaborate, because on most commercial developments, commercial real estate, it does require collaboration of the banker, the builder, the contractor, whomever that might be, a developer who has expertise. Even if you have an idea on the business, you may need to get a developer to come join you. But all of that has to take place in one smooth operating machine. And so I would say that one has to realize in commercial development, it takes time to put all those pieces together.
Yeah.
It takes time. And also to make it a point to don't one source your resource. And by that, I mean, if you're going to make an effort, try to have multiple parties in that same area you can talk to, so that you have a backup.
Yeah.
If the property has a need for testing or toxic chemicals, I just use that as an example. Have more than one resource so that you can make sure that it's done properly. If you need to have a cost assessment done, what does it cost to build it? Have more than one party you can go to try to give you competitive and comparative pricing, for example.
Yep.
Insurance, because even as something is being built, commercial real estate, there is a liability and a risk factor. Make sure that you've got more than one source that can give you quotes for insurance.
That's right. Yep. I think all of those points can help a project go smoothly. And just like you said, I've seen projects recently, especially with the way the economy has been due to this pandemic. Banks tighten up and they can make a change mid-project or right prior to your project to decide, they don't want to do that deal for you. And so just like you said, having resources or having a backup is important because credit appetite can change at any time. So
It can.
it's
It
important.
can. And getting back to your question on real estate, one of the things that we often see is that when we look around to see real estate development, commercial development, it often is done by people who don't look like us. But if we can join together, and if you have like-minded professionals or someone with an interest similar to yours and you're compatible, don't be hesitant to join together with two or three to increase your capacity to buy that tract of land that will allow you to be able to get some commercial development done, or to be able to band together, form an investment group so that you, with your increased power, are able to leverage that and then get something done to the benefit of everyone. We always have many times the assumption made that it's one-on-one. But when often on large scale and moderate sized commercial development, it's a whole group that's working to get it done, but they just don't often look like us.
That's right.
And we have to be willing to work with those who look like us where we can to try to put together a stronger team to get work done.
That's right. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there are a lot of groups that combine to get projects completed, and you do have to sometimes join because the expense is much more than sometimes one individual can handle. And so it's always good to pool capital together, pool your minds together, and then make a project happen.
And one of the things I think is very good is that, as we talked on it just briefly, is take the time to plan. And I'll use a perfect example. I spent a year or so trying to help a gentleman, and he and his team had a wonderful project that they wanted to build in the area of cybersecurity recently. And they failed not because the project idea was not a good one. They failed not because the vision on the need was not good. The reason that they failed was that they came to the table what I call ill prepared, when the funding sources were asking the serious questions and realized that they had not taken the time to do their study. They had not laid out a schedule. Who's going to be the management team? What resources are you going to rely upon? How are you going to actually work with the local authorities? All of those, the basic planning was not being there. They then in turn ultimately walked away. The point that I'm trying to make is that adequate planning would have allowed them on that commercial real estate project for them to see that there's a strong team. They could have probably succeeded. And that project right here in our area that I'm geographically located in here was going to be a wonderful, incredible opportunity for an African-American led major development in the cybersecurity arena to go forward. But the two parties failed to plan. And then as a result of that failure to plan, the fraction that began to break between the two of them in front of the funding source and the capital providers showed that they weren't ready. And that's one of the things that I like to bring that up as something for us to make sure that we consider for those who are listening and will listen to the conversation you and I are having. Take the time to plan, no matter what, whether it's business, commercial real estate development, a project, plan early. Ask the questions. What if? Why not? What might go wrong? Who do I need? Is this a good idea? Can I do it myself? If I need help, who will it be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All of those are key points. I mean, I think planning is so crucial to building credibility, but also to helping you prevent risks that you might not see or you might not think about if you just jump in the water. And so I think that's a great example of how things can go wrong, even if you have really smart people in the room. Planning is very important. What if you were to discuss some best practices? And we actually discussed a little bit about seeking financing, so we'll skip to the next question. Talk a little bit about just risk management. You spoke about a little bit about having an insurance agent involved, and also planning and thinking about what the risk might be down the line. But discuss the importance of risk management to somebody personally and also professionally.
My suggestion regarding risk management is always to assume that something can go wrong, that something unexpected will happen. And on a personal level, when we run a business or we have a business, risk management, the first thing to look at is have insurance. I'll use a very specific example to help those who are listening to understand. There's a business that I was assisting not too long ago, which the business was thriving. It was small, but thriving. The owner did not think it was necessary to secure insurance because their view was, well, uh, nothing's likely to go wrong. One accident that they happened to have with the vehicle that they were driving, with the equipment that they were using, put them out of business because of the fact that they had no way to recover when they had that accident. And the coverage was not expensive, but they just did not believe that that few $100s a month in insurance was necessary when they were striving to pay the bills, trying to buy material. So in best practices, the first step is to make sure that you reduce the risk by having insurance. And when I talk about reducing risk, it's also not just simply insurance for damage from an insurance policy, but rather also reducing risk by having someone with expertise. We talked about that. So best practices, again, going back to expertise. What I would suggest, if we're in an area that has a small business assistance agency, a best practice is to seek out the SBA. And the reason that I say that is because often it is free. It is executive expertise paid for by taxpayer dollars to be available, whether one is in a small city or a large city or even in a rural area, where you can call up and get expertise to help you. So for best practice, know that there are resources out there. Call the SBA, have insurance in place, be willing to actually utilize, in some cases, the education system around. What I mean by that is if there's a school or university, offer an internship as a best practice to lower your costs and still be able to serve your business model. We always like to assume that we are doing it, as we said a little earlier, alone, but there are resources that are available such as that. So best practice in summary, have your insurance. Take the time to put resources around you that have regulatory and accounting expertise. Be willing to collaborate with any area, school or university, or even high school for that matter, depending upon where one is, to offer workforce opportunities for young people or those who are looking for work that can then get you someone that could be a long-term employment resource. And the last thing I would say for best practice, which we mentioned earlier, is always align yourself with someone who's doing something similar, whether it's the same business, but at least in industry, in entrepreneurship, trying to run a small business, trying to start a small business, or have others around you who are doing something similar to share your experiences, your failures, and your successes. And one last best practice I will offer is this, and I'm going to put a caveat with it. Have a mentor. Seek out a mentor if there's one available, but be careful. I say be careful with the mentor because you want a mentor that has the right mentality, the right expertise to be helpful, and not be a mentor that could be damaging if they don't have the right approach, if they don't have the right expertise, if they don't have the right personality that matches yours. A mentor should be one that's comfortable in critiquing you, but not in tearing you down.
That's right.
And so those are the best practices that I would suggest to anybody getting started. And I did forget one item, and that would be take the time to know what your county resources are in terms of what does it take to file for business licenses. Where do you go to pay your local taxes? What do you have to do to be able to stay current and to stay in good standing with your local municipality? Those are the best practices that I would say would be well worth the time to do the research to do.
And those are great. Those are great points. I mean, I think risk management. I've run into a lot of businesses or individuals that don't anticipate or don't prepare properly, or they cut corners, because of costs, and then something happens and that they haven't prepared for, and then they don't have the insurance to cover it, or they don't have the cushion in cash to cover it. And those are the things that I think are extremely important to do.
Let me use an example with what you just said when you said cut the corners. I have a client that I work with, and she wanted to keep her costs down, didn't do the right risk management. So when it came to her accounting, she hired a tax accountant to be her bookkeeper. The tax accountant knows how to prepare tax returns, but not to give her advice on accounting decisions. As a result, At the end of last year, she received a bill for $92,000 and a tax bill because the accounting decisions that she made were not the right ones at several points during the year with capitalizing her assets, fixed assets. I'm just using that as a perfect example. The risk assessment was not made to do an assessment early on. Just because the person was excellent at preparing a tax return did not make them a good accountant, a good bookkeeper. She missed the opportunity to make the right accounting decisions, and as a result, took that risk. And for saving the few $100 a month in bookkeeping costs and accounting costs, she cost herself $92,000 in a tax bill that she has to now pay. She can't go back and change that.
Yep. I talk to people all the time about how, with an accountant should not just prepare your tax returns. If you really want, if you're a business that's thriving and growing, or individual that their income is continuing to grow, you need people to help you plan. You need people to help to be a little bit more involved and invested in protecting you.
Right.
And the same goes with bankers. The same goes with financial advisors. You need a planning component, not just seeing them once a year and moving on. And that example that you gave is one I think anybody in the business world or helping people in the business world, they've seen some examples that are very, very similar. And I think that's a great point for people that aren't aware or that want to cut corners. Even the type of statements you have can help you, whether they're tax returns or audits or reviews, so I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but I just wanted to reemphasize what you said.
If there's one thing I could offer as a good piece of advice to anyone, it would be to have an analytical process. If we have an analytical process, I think that will help in all decision making. And that is, what is the problem? What are the at least 3 options? And once you make a decision out of the 1, 2, 3, what is the best option, you're willing to then move forward. But having that analytical process will at least have, so you're consistent in your thinking. And that's the mindset I'm trying to suggest. An analytical process, which is identify the problem, whatever it might be. What are my options? What I perceive the best option, pros and cons. Second option, pros and cons. And third, but once you make a decision on which is the best option, be willing to go with that decision and not then beat yourself up in crisis of indecision. And if you've done that properly, if option 1 was not the best, you at least have a best chance to pivot to number 2 if you find that you were wrong. And that's still all part of the risk assessment.
That's right. That's right. Well, we are moving towards the end of the hour, so I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. And so normally what I do to end this, or what I've done to end this recently, because we've talked a lot of good business thus far, is I ended with something fun where I go through a speed round of 5 questions, and then I'll ask you questions and you'll respond with quick answers. And then we'll end, and I'll let you get on to the rest of your day, so you can have the rest of your day.
Well, let's see how it works.
Okay. So first question is your favorite book.
Dante's Inferno.
Okay. Favorite movie.
The Fountainhead.
Biggest accomplishment.
Exposing the fraud that was taking place at Fannie Mae.
Favorite place to travel.
Believe it or not, Cortland, Virginia, my hometown.
All right. Favorite college course.
I love finance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Believe it or not, I love finance.
And I think it shows. I think it shows a lot. I mean, that's this has been an extremely engaging conversation for me, just because of my background and experience. But I also think the points that you raise are needed. I think it's hopefully will be beneficial to anybody who gets a chance to hear or watch. And I'm appreciative of you coming on. And I thank you for being a partner in Equity Partners Journey. And thank you again, Mr. Barnes, for joining me.
You're welcome, and I enjoyed it myself. But there's one caveat here. Anyone who's less than 60 years old will have no idea what the movie The Fountainhead was.
well, they have to go look it up. And you say you're a history buff, so they have to be history buffs and go ahead and look it up and see if they can watch it. But I think, I had a conversation before this in episode 4, and another person that was a history buff as well. And I think one thing he said was it's important to revisit those that came before you, because they can have, they've been in the position that you're in right now. And so I think it's important for people to know, regardless if you're 50, 60, 30, 20, you can learn from people that have had experiences that you haven't had yet.
It's been a pleasure talking with you this morning, and it's certainly my hope that something I've said will be deemed beneficial to someone else.
I appreciate it. You have a great Saturday, and I will be in touch with you soon.
You do the same. Bye now.
All right, take care.